everyone, it's Casey. Welcome to your Soft Heart BeBe Baby class. We are going to learn to make this doll right here. This is my Soft Heart doll design. This video is intended for students who have taken my class or potentially a future standalone video. The reason I mentioned the class is because we are not going to go through the sewing process. We are going to begin where my students begin, and that is with pieces already sewn. So when you sign up for one of my classes, you receive the parts already sewn, if that's the option that you choose, or you can choose to sew your own pieces, but class begins with parts sewn. The main reason for that is to keep the class not too long for everyone and to avoid issues with sewing skills. So this option makes it much easier for anyone who doesn't own a sewing machine or who doesn't know how to use a sewing machine and would prefer to start here. So all you need to do when you have the pieces is be able to stuff them, do some soft sculpting, and some hand stitching. So there's no machine involved. So when you sign up, these are the parts you receive for your doll. So let's talk about some of the other supplies you will need to finish your doll. So you will need hand sewing needle. I prefer longer needles, but any needle that is comfortable for you to hand sew with. You will need an extra long needle. These, I believe, are 5 inches. You'll notice that the needles are curved. That is just from use. They don't come that way. That is just from me using them over time. They have become bent, which is fine. They still work. So you'll need a hand sewing smaller needle and a long needle. You can get those from Amazon pretty easily. You will need regular scissors for cutting your thread. You will need upholstery thread. So upholstery thread is very hard. It doesn't break easily, and we use this for soft sculpture, and I use it for everything with the doll, as far as closing the openings and doing the sculpting. Upholstery thread is also super easy to find. I get the lighter color and use it for all of my dolls. It's pretty hidden, so it won't really matter. A purple disappearing ink pen. This is a tool that is super important for making marks on the doll that will disappear over time, or if you are going to be sewing your own pieces, for tracing the pattern. You will also need a black fabric marker. Pretty much any fabric marker will work, and this is for drawing on the face. You will need some sort of stuffing tool. This is an old sculpting tool that I've had for a really long time. It works amazing for stuffing because it has a little forked top. Other stuffing sticks that other doll makers suggest are chopsticks or things like that, but for me, a lot of times those just slip between the stuffing and then they don't actually push it down. So if you can find something that's forked like this, or even take your chopstick and carve in sort of a forked end to it, it will work better. You will need something for blush. I use ink or a wax crayon. I don't have it out here at the moment. We'll get that out when we get there. And a wax crayon will be better for washing. The ink can fade over time if you're going to wash the doll a lot. So if your doll is for children, you might want to use something that's more permanent than ink. If it's not for children and it's not going to be washed, then the ink is fine. And the other thing is stuffing. So I use just a regular polyester stuffing. Some considerations with stuffing: if you have allergies, there are all kinds of other materials you can use, but polyester is what I use. I think it is the most inexpensive and the easiest to use. It keeps a nice form inside the doll, but there are other things you may find that work better for you, especially with allergies. If you are planning to weight your doll, so the doll, when I make the dolls for my shop, I do not put any weight in them because they are intended for children. So weighting materials can be a little iffy because of choking hazards and doll standards for children's toys. So if you are going to stuff the doll, I would highly recommend using something that's certified for use inside soft toys. So those are usually plastic pellets, which you can pour directly into the doll, or even safer would be to create a little sack to put inside the doll. Other than that, I wouldn't put anything inside the doll if it's intended for children, and I don't put any weighting inside dolls intended for children, even if it is certified. It's not worth the risk to me, and they actually have a pretty hefty weight with just stuffing, so they feel pretty good. And that's really all you need. I don't think I'm forgetting anything. So we're going to go ahead and get started. About the pattern, so the fabric that I use, I will put a link or send a link to you, however you're receiving this video, of a video on my YouTube channel I recently made about how I dye my own fabric. So I'm not going to go through that whole process right now. But if you're using my fabric, I do double it. So you can see that it's doubled here. To make these dolls, it gives it the body a much firmer feeling, which I like, especially for children. So I double the fabric. If you're not using my fabric and you are sewing your own pieces, keep in mind that different fabric is going to have a different result depending on the stretch and the blend of the material. So if you're looking for getting as close to my look as possible, I do sell my fabric. So if you need some, please reach out. I normally don't have it listed in my shop, but I make it by request for customers. So reach out to me if you would like fabric. Otherwise, these parts are doubled, so you'll have 2 arms and a body with legs. And then the part that usually confuses everyone is, why are there 3 heads? So let me explain why there are 3 heads. So a typical Waldorf style doll, the base of the doll is made with needle felting the features. So the artist will needle felt a head and then cover it with skin fabric and then do maybe some sculpting, and those needle felted features will poke through the skin fabric, and that's how they make features on Waldorf dolls. I'm not saying that my dolls are considered Waldorf dolls, but they're kind of in that realm of cloth doll soft sculpture. And when I first started making dolls, I wanted to be able to build up the face and have puffier cheeks and a little nose and ears. And so originally I started with 1 head, but it was hard to get those features to pop out with 1 head. So I stuffed the head and then I stretched a layer over it and then stuffing between the layers, and that worked and was closer to what I wanted, but the stuffing was showing through a little bit between the layers. So I finally settled on 3 layers, and the purpose is to build up those areas that you want to be a little bit puffier, like cheeks and a nose. So you'll have your 3 pieces. The first piece will have a smallish opening. The second piece will have a larger opening and no ears on these 2 pieces. The final piece will have the ears and a larger opening because you'll be stretching it over all of it. So we're going to get started. The first step is going to be to stuff your first headpiece. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so the hardest thing for me to convey virtually or on video is how much to stuff your head. So you want the head to be pretty firm but not overstuffed, and it may take some practice for you to kind of gauge how much that is. But basically, because if your head looks still very flat, you probably haven't stuffed it enough. If you have a hard time stretching a layer over the head, then you probably have stuffed it too much. So you just want it to be, like I said, pretty firm but not stretched and not flat. So that is the best way I can describe that. The next thing that is a little bit hard is learning a very important stitch called the ladder stitch. The ladder stitch is a stitch that we use to close openings. It's a really important stitch to learn if you're going to make soft toys. You're going to use it for everything. But it does take some practice if you've never done it before. So I'm going to go through slowly and show you the ladder stitch. And then you can rewind and pause the video as you follow along until you get it. We will not go slowly on the other parts of the video for the ladder stitch. This will be sort of the only part we're going to go very, very slow. So the first thing you want to do is get a piece of upholstery thread and tie a knot. Can you see the knot? In one end. Thread your needle. You're going to insert your needle underneath and inside one side of the opening and come out. That is going to hide the knot on the inside of the doll. Then whenever you're coming out like this, you will cross over to the other side of the opening and go down and in. Now, when you are coming out from under, you want to go back under that same side and come out. Now, whenever you're coming out, you cross over and go down. And basically that is the stitch. You'll do a couple stitches and then we will pull it tight. So let's do that again. We're coming out the bottom, so we want to go back out that same side. Now we're coming out, so we want to cross over and go down. Back under and up. Over and down. And back up. Now we have a few stitches, so we will pull tight. And the best way to do that is to pinch it a little bit so the sides come together without pulling the knot out on the end, and you'll pull tight and you'll see that that nicely folds those stitches under. They'll come out a little as it stretches open, and that's okay. Now we're coming out, so we want to cross over and under, and then under. And if you get stuck or you do it wrong, just take your stitches out and start again. Now we're coming out, so we want to cross over. And we'll pull it. Now we're coming out, so we cross over. Go under. Over. And now when you get to the end, you're going to come back out and push your needle back in as if you're going to do another stitch, but come out somewhere in the middle of where you've been sewing. Pull it tight one last time to get everything tightly together, and then you're going to just tie a knot however you want to do that. Couple times and push that needle through the head out somewhere, anywhere, and trim it off. That will hide the end of the thread inside the doll for a neat little close. So as I said, feel free to go back, rewind, slow motion of that stitch. So now that you have your head, you're going to take your next piece without ears with a larger opening and stretch it over that base. One thing you want to make sure is that you are lining up the seams of the two heads. So otherwise, if you don't line them up, you'll have a bump somewhere. So just as best you can, line up those seams by pulling the fabric. And so you'll see that I pretty easily got the head, the second piece, to go over, so it should not be a struggle. If you feel like you're stretching it and ripping it to get it over that piece, you've overstuffed that first piece. If it goes over very easily and it's still very flat, then probably you haven't stuffed it enough. But once you've done that, this is the part where you're going to add the cheeks and the nose. So you want a little bit more stuffing. Pick whatever side is going to be the front of your face, and between those two layers you're going to stuff your cheeks. If you can't get them as poofy as you want them, you can always add more stuffing as you sew this opening closed, and I'll show you how to do that if you want puffier cheeks. So you'll do two larger balls for the cheeks, and then a smaller ball here for the nose. And now you're going to do the same thing. You're going to use that ladder stitch, another piece of thread, tie a knot in the end, and we're going to use that ladder stitch to close the opening. Again, we start like this. Now, like I said, at this point, if you want those cheeks to be puffier, you can take a little more stuffing and stuff it under there where you're stitching, and that can poof it up a little bit if you flattened it from your stitching, or you can just leave it and keep sewing it shut. But I like those puffy cheeks. One thing to remember is these bottom layers are not going to be seen. They'll be hidden inside the doll. So if you do mess up and it's not as pretty as you'd like, it's not the end of the world on these two layers. It's this outer layer that's going to be seen. I've been asked, can you sew the layers at the same time? And the answer is really no, because you're stuffing, it's hard to get all the layers sewn independent or together, because independently you need to make sure that they're lining up and that you're able to stuff them. So at this point, again, you're going to stretch your last layer over, again making sure those seams are matching up as best you can. You can pull gently and push at the same time, stuffing the doll inside. You're going to want to look at your ears and make sure that they are symmetrical and you don't have one up here and one down here, so you can kind of pull them around until you see that they're basically in the same spot. Then you're going to need a little bit of stuffing for those ears, so just a little bit, push it into the ear. And now you'll sew this shut one more time with the ladder stitch with your upholstery thread, and then your head will be assembled and we will do the soft sculpting. right, so our head is ready for soft sculpting. But before we do that, let's go ahead and stuff our body and our arms. So with the arms, the main thing about the arms is you don't want to stuff it too firmly all the way to the top. So your stuffing tool can help you get down in that finger. Get some stuffing in there. But really, there's very little stuffing involved in the arm. If your arm is stretching too much, the fabric you used might not be the best. Because if you're using this fabric, or if it's parts that I sent you, this fabric has 4-way stretch and it's doubled, so it should not stretch your arm really long or really wide. It should stay pretty well formed. So as I said, you don't want to stuff all the way to the top. You want to leave the top kind of empty so that the arm will be floppy. So let's stuff our other arm. All right, that's about good. So our body, we're going to stuff our body. The main thing is getting your stuffing all the way down into the feet. So you kind of have to stick your fingers in there, push it down. As far as how much you should stuff the body, again, firm but not overstuffed is the best way that I can describe it. The doll will still be squishy, but you don't want to overstuff any of it. Alright, so we have all our parts stuffed. We do need to sew up the arms and the body as well as sculpt them, so let's get started on that. Let's start with our arms. Okay, so for our arms, we're going to want an extra long piece of upholstery thread. The reason we want an extra long piece is because we are going to sew up the hole, and we're going to use the same thread to go down and stitch the fingers, and then we're going to use the same thread to go all the way up and leave a tail off of the top of the arm, because that's the thread that we'll use to sew the arm to the body. So I like to streamline anything if possible, and you don't have to do that. You could use a different thread, one thread to close it, one thread for this, and one thread for that if you want to. But I like, as I said, to try to get it all in one. So we're going to do this extra long thread, we're going to tie a knot, and then we're going to go ahead and use our ladder stitch to close the opening first in the arm. The first step is to close the opening. So let's do that. Alright, so once you are at the end, you're going to use your handy dandy purple pen to give yourself some marks for the fingers. It will help guide you as you make them, as you stitch them. And you may need your longer needle to push down to the fingers, or you might be able to use a shorter one, whatever you have. I'm going to thread my longer needle, and I'm going to go ahead and push it down to the top of one of the fingers and come out. Now, this pattern does not have individual fingers. I do have another pattern available, the newborn BeBe, that does have individual fingers if that's something you want to learn. I will say it takes a lot of practice to learn that style of fingers, so I like to kind of especially if you're a beginner, start with this type of finger. So what you're going to do is make a stitch, maybe 1/4 of an inch, and come out the back about the exact same. If it helps you to draw marks on the back too, you can do that, but you want to go straight down, and basically we're just going to stitch a running stitch, and that is going to provide the definition of the fingers. So we're just gonna make stitches that are about 1/4 of an inch. It's not a big deal how long they are or if they're exactly perfect, to define your fingers. And then when you get to the end, you're going to wrap the thread around and go through the back to the top of the next finger. Now you might see that your marks have kind of shifted, so I'm not going to go straight on that mark that I made, because I think it's too close. So it might take you a little while to gauge. You just want to make sure that your fingers are about the same width, otherwise you'll end up with one very skinny finger and a couple fat fingers. So you're going to do the same thing, a running stitch along there. And then over the top again to the last finger. Same thing. And when you're on the last finger now, you're going to do the same thing where you're going to push the needle through, but this time we're going to do some soft sculpting on the hand to define the hand. So you're going to come out on one side or the other of the wrist. When you pull that thread tight, you'll see all your fingers are defined. And now we're going to do a stitch behind the thumb here all the way across, and come out again on the other side of the wrist. And when we do that stitch and pull it tight, we're going to have a little definition there in the wrist. We're going to stitch another stitch across the wrist and come out behind on the inside of the elbow. So you'll see when we pull that tight now, we have a defined hand that has a wrist. Now we're going to take a stitch across the inner elbow so that we can get that inner elbow, and we're going to push our needle out the top of the arm. And when we pull that, now we have a little arm that has a wrist and a little elbow area. You may have to pull it and hold it a little bit tight as you tie off the knot so that that wrist one or the elbow one will stay pulled tight. So you're going to want to tie a knot here at the top of the arm, and then go ahead and leave the thread, this long tail of your thread attached. Don't cut it off, because this is the thread that we're going to use to now attach the arm to the body. So now you're going to go through that same process for your other arm. I'm not going to record myself doing the other arm. I'm just going to go ahead and do it really quickly so that we can move on. But you're going to follow the same steps. The only difference, and when I get to that point I will show you, the only difference is if you want to make the arms in the classic soft heart BeBe Babies fashion, you're going to have one where the hand is open, and you're going to have another one where the fingers are in a fist. So I will show you how to do that. It's pretty simple. It's just a matter of folding the fingers over. But we do that with the same thread prior to doing the wrist and the arm and going up top. So I'm going to get this arm going. When I get to that point, I will show you what I do there. All right, so when you reach this point where you're at the end of doing your fingers and you're going to do your last, going over that last finger, instead of pushing the needle up to the wrist, we're going to fold that hand down and then make a couple of stitches along each row of fingers. So going up where you've made those finger stitches and then down into the hand. It'll mostly be hidden underneath, but you can see the stitches in there. But as you pull them tight, it'll be more hidden. The only thing to keep in mind is if you're potentially wanting to do both hands this way, just make sure that you're folding the hands over in the opposite ways like this, because you don't want two hands like this, because that doesn't work. And I've done it before, not paying attention. We'll talk about that when we get to the feet also. So now once you've sewn that hand down, when you do go in, this is where you're gonna come into the wrist. When you make that last and final finger stitch, just pull it really tight so that it's flat, and then you're gonna go ahead and make your wrist stitches just like we did on the other doll, but now you have a hand that is in a fist. So you make your two wrist stitches, get that finger caught, then your elbow stitch, and then come again back out at the top, pull it tight, hold it pretty tight so that you can tie a knot and keep those stitches from coming loose. So we're gonna tie our knot here, and then again leave that long tail of thread attached. Don't cut it off because we'll use it to attach our arms to the body. So those are the arms for now. Let's go ahead and soft sculpt our body now so that we can attach the arms and the head. So for the body, again, you're going to want a really long piece of upholstery thread because we are going to sculpt the entire body with one piece of thread. Again though, if you don't make your thread long enough, you can always just tie off somewhere, knot off somewhere so that the threads don't come loose and start a new thread. Again, I just do this for efficiency. So we're going to be using our long needle here to do the body. And before we get started, we're going to draw our toes on. This is helpful as a guide, like the fingers, but even more helpful on the feet because you want to make sure that you do your toes correctly. So you want your lines going in opposite directions so that you have a left foot and a right foot, and you don't have the toes going in the wrong direction. So you're going to have your big toes and then they get smaller, big toe and get smaller. I hope that makes sense. So we're going to start by inserting our needle behind the knee because that's how we're going to hide our knot. And we're going to come out at the top of the first big toe. Doesn't matter which side you start on. You're going to pull it through. That knot's going to hide back there. For the big toe, I usually make one stitch, kind of like the fingers. We're going to do these running stitches. On the other toes, I don't stitch. I just fold right over the end of the toe. But on this first one, I do. That helps anchor that knot so that you don't, when you pull, you don't pull that knot here all the way through. So you're going to just make one stitch on the big toe. And when you come back through the top, now we're just going to fold it over just like we did on the fingers and come on up to the next toe. And you'll pull that tight and it will define your big toe there. And just go ahead. Now we're not going to take stitches. We're just going to fold that thread right over the top of the toe for each now smaller toe. And on to the last little toe there. And now when we're on that last toe, we're going to come up to sort of the top of the foot because this is where we're going to define the ankle. So just like on the hand, we'll take a stitch over and we'll go back to the back of the foot. Pull that tight. And now we'll take this back stitch and come out behind the knee. Take a stitch behind the knee, and if you want to do dimples in the knee, you're going to come out on one side of the knee. And again, most of this is optional, and make sure as you go you keep pulling tight, because as you pull tight, you'll pull the stitches a couple behind where you're at tighter. Like this stitch will be very loose because it's the last one we did, but we'll start pulling those tighter as we go. So you'll just take a little stitch to form that dimple on both sides of the knee. Make sure you don't put your needle back in the same hole the thread is coming out of. You do want to make a tiny little stitch there. And now this is where I come out at the belly button, and we're going to cross over to the other leg now. Some people like to put booties on their doll, like bums. I go ahead and just do a belly button and then down to the groin area. If you want to do a little butt, you can fold your thread up this way and do that. I prefer to have no genitals on my dolls, so I'll just take a stitch there and move over to the other leg behind the knee. Pulling it tight now, you'll see we've got our dimple and this leg is done. We have a belly button, and now we're going to start back here by making a stitch behind this knee. And we're going to kind of go in reverse now since we're working our way down. We're going to do that stitch behind the knee and the dimples. And now we're going to go down to the toe here. We're not going to do the ankle yet. We're going to do the toes first on this side. Now remember, on that big toe, we're going to take one stitch there. Go back up and then pull the thread over like this, and the rest of the toes we will do it that way. And now we'll go ahead and do our ankle parts here. After all of our toes are done, the top of the ankle, the back of the ankle, and then we've done everything. So I then come out behind that knee on the side that we're on and tie a knot back there to secure our sculpture. Now you might have to pull it tight and again squeeze that leg to hold it so that those stitches don't loosen up as you're tying your knot. So go ahead and tie a knot back here behind the knee as discreetly as you can. You'll tie that knot and then go ahead and push your needle through the knot and out the body somewhere, and that will sort of pull that knot inside a little bit, and you'll cut your thread off. And there you have the body. So now we have the body, we have the arms, but I have found that it's easier to do the arms last so that the head does not skew them in any way. So we're going to go ahead and put the body and the arms aside and do our head and get that attached. So for the head, if you are interested in painting eyes, you want to have an open eye doll, please check out my free video on YouTube of how I paint my eyes. It'll give you all that information. If you want to do the classic sleeping BeBe baby, we are going to first draw the eyes on. So let's do that. You're going to need your black fabric marker. Pretty much any fabric marker will work for this. I would not use a Sharpie if at all possible. I've had those bleed in the past. Another thing you can do if you're nervous about making your first mark on the doll is you can practice first with your disappearing ink pen, but just keep in mind that it does take some time for the ink to disappear. I would not use water even though it says you can use water. I would not. It does sometimes stain this type of fabric if you're putting spots of water on there, so I wouldn't do that. But you can at least get a feel for it. You could practice on another piece of fabric just to kind of feel how it's going to feel. But if you start making marks with this purple pen, it might just get even more confusing and look even more messy. So however it works for you to feel comfortable, sometimes it's best to just give it a go. Lots of people have preference on where eyes should be placed. I've always done it the way that it makes sense to me. And I've been told in the past that I put my noses too high, but that's okay because that's the way I like them. So I've been asked exactly how far from the bottom they are, and so we're going to draw them and we'll go ahead and measure so you can see at least a kind of general idea. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw. So the BeBe baby's face is 2 eyes with 2 little lashes and a cute little smile. Now you don't have to do a smile, you could do a frown, you could do anything you want. The mouth is about 1.5 inches from the bottom seam, and then the eye, the inner eye, is about 1 inch from the corner of the mouth. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a gauge. You also can use your purple pen just to make dots and not actually draw full things. So I do use the purple pen to give myself guides for the nose. So that's where I'm going to start my stitches for the nose. So you can go ahead and mark that if you want. And then we're going to go ahead and take our really long upholstery thread again, knotted on one end, and we're going to use our very long needle again because we're going to use one piece of thread to sculpt this doll's face. So you're going to start at the bottom and push your needle through up to one of your guides for the nose and pull that knot up there. And now for the nose, you're going to take a small stitch on the same side. And the important part of soft sculpting is that you don't just stitch straight across. You actually want to punch the needle down and sort of try to scoop and push down on this side and scoop that stuffing up when you come out the other side. That's how you get stuffing in there and a nose that will be defined. So then you're going to kind of pull it tight, and you're going to make same kind of stitch on the other side. Now you're going down just a little bit, push that needle down, push on the other side of the face, scoop that stuffing up, and come out a little bit below the stitch you just made on the other side. What we're basically doing here is making stitches that are going to pull that stuffing up so we can start defining the nose. We're going to do that one more time on both sides. But this time when we come down, we are actually going to go out the nostril. And so if it helps you, you can draw yourself 2 little dots for nostrils, and we're going to come down out that first nostril. Again, make sure you're pulling tight. For the nostrils, you want to take a tiny little stitch. Remember never to go back through the same hole the thread is coming out of. That will just pull the thread inside and you won't get a little defined stitch. So you want to make just a tiny stitch there back into the nostril, and now we're going to come up a little bit inside the nose because we're going to try to curve it around and make a little button nose there. So we're going to do that. So we've come back up here, and we want to take the stitch over now and down to the opposite nostril, the other nostril. And now you'll see we define that top of the nose with that stitch. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to make a little stitch for the nostril and come out again now on the other side of the top of the nose. You can see that little nose is forming, and then we'll make that last stitch, and now we're going to come out to the corner of the mouth. and our nose is done. We've got a cute little nose. So for the mouth, we're going to make a stitch, and you'll notice I'm going down and scooping, and we're going to come out in the inner corner of the eye, make a stitch, and now we're going all the way over to the ear, to the bottom of the ear on the back side. Now we're going to take some stitches around the ear to define it. So we're going to go across the bottom, up to the top, and across, and now out the middle of the ear. And you'll see now we have defined around the ear, and we make a stitch inside the ear and push our needle out to the outside corner of that eye. And when we pull it tight now, we will have an ear that has been defined. And now when we take this stitch on this outside corner eye, we're going to go back over to the other side of the mouth, pulling tight as we go. And now we basically need to do the same thing on the other side. So we'll take a stitch in the mouth and come out the opposite inner eye. Make a stitch and go over to the ear. Make a stitch and go to the top of the ear. Make a stitch and come out the middle of the ear. Make a stitch and come out to the outer eye, the last eye here. And now we're going to make that stitch, and we're going to come back out the bottom of the doll's head. And now I usually make one extra stitch here just so that we can pull it tight and make sure everything is staying tight. You may make one or two extra stitches. It depends on how loose your stitches come. But one or two should hold it tight, and then go ahead and tie a knot. Push that needle inside the knot into the head and come out somewhere and trim it, cut it off, and you will have your cute little face. So now is a great time to blush your face, or you can do it at the end. I also sometimes use a brown marker, a brown fabric marker, to just sort of define inside the nostrils and around the outside of the nose. As I mentioned, I do use ink, usually for blush. I actually need to get new ink here. You can also use crayon. You may be able to use acrylic. I like the ink because it gives it a really smooth look, and some other things get very splotchy. I do a little on the ears, and I just kind of build it up until it's how I want it. It will fade if this doll gets washed a lot, so keep that in mind if it's a doll for children. So now our face is done, and we want to attach it now to the body. So if you have a piece of thread that's left over from anything that you've been doing, grab that. Otherwise, thread yourself a medium length upholstery thread. The first thing we need to do is sew the body closed using our ladder stitch. So as I've mentioned multiple times, that ladder stitch is such an important stitch. You use it for pretty much everything, every part of the doll. So just be sure to practice that. So we're going to go ahead and sew the body closed, and we're going to use this same piece of thread to sew the head on. All right, so once you've sewn that closed, you're going to hold your head up, and then you're just going to sew it on. I believe it's called a whip stitch. I forgot to look. But this is a much easier stitch because you're just literally stitching the head to the doll. It will show a little bit, but that's sort of the charm, at least of my dolls. And there is an option to put plastic joints in the doll. That is something that you could do. But again, those plastic joints can have small parts, and if you don't attach them perfectly, or the doll wears out or something, it could be small parts that come off. And so I really prefer this method for any dolls that are going to potentially be intended for children. So you're just going to be going back and forth, sewing it on until you I pretty much keep sewing until it looks right to me, or also I've kind of covered any of those knots or kind of uglier parts of the bottom of the head or the top of the body. But as you go, you'll kind of gauge it yourself. So I'll usually stop about there and say, that looks about right, maybe a couple more. And then when you're done, you just want to bring your needle out the back somewhere and tie a knot that's a little bit discreet. Just like we always do, tie our knot and push the needle in to the body to hide that knot as best as we can and cut it off. All right, we're getting really close. So now we have to do our arms, and remember we have folded over this hand, so we want to make sure that that one goes on that side and this one goes on this side. We're going to do the same kind of whip stitch that we just did on the head, where we're just going to sew the arms on ragdoll style. It is sometimes awkward to sew the arms on. You want to hold them up and start kind of sewing at a weird angle. So it may take you a couple times to get used to this, but it's a pretty simple stitch. So going across the top of the arm, and just keep holding it and adjusting it as you go. You don't want to end up sewing the arm like this or like this. So holding it and kind of being as straight as possible as you sew across. Again, you're just sewing until it's about right. Sometimes I go back to the other side and do a couple more stitches on the back of the arm. Whatever looks right to you. And then when you're done, again, you're going to go under there and hide your knot, tie a little knot and hide it. And now when you do the other arm, the main thing is just matching the arms up so you don't have one really high and one really low. And so you'll see, this is why I said don't stuff the very top of the arm. If you stuff all the way up there, you're going to have an arm that's sticking up in the air, which isn't a big deal because once you put clothes on, it will lay down. But we like to kind of keep that laying down. So now we're going to go ahead and do the other arm. And as I said, you want to hold it up and match it as best you can. This is kind of the hard part. You want to match it to the other arm so that they're not all wonky. And if you find other ways to do this that you like better, feel free. The only thing that I request on selling or advertising anything that you have made from my pattern is that you credit me. So feel free to sell the dolls that you make. Just in any advertisements, please credit me as the pattern maker. Even if you alter the pattern, if it's still an idea developed from my pattern, please just credit me. That's all I ask. But that being said, you definitely can enlarge the pattern. You could change it. You could, like I said, you could put joints in. You could add fingers to this pattern. You could do all kinds of things to get creative, and I highly recommend that. I would love if you joined the fan club. There is a BeBe Babies and Friends fan club on Facebook, and the members there share dolls that they've made from my patterns. You're welcome to advertise any dolls for sale there made from my patterns. Just again, crediting, of course, obviously if you're on the fan club, you'll be crediting. So anyway, feel free to get creative and share. I love to see people working with my patterns. All right, so we've got this last arm on, and this is very exciting because it means that we are basically done. So we're going to talk just a little bit about clothing, and then our doll will be done. So let me grab the clothing I have for this doll. All right, so here is our little doll, and our last step is blushing other parts like the hands, and you'll notice you can still see our finger marks. That's okay, those will probably fade by tomorrow. No need to use water. I blush the hands and the knees, so we're going to do that. And then with your pattern included a diaper pattern, so a little diaper fits these guys. And as far as clothing, these little guys fit most preemie size clothing. However, some of the clothing brands only have newborn, or their preemie size is still too big. And so when that's the case, I will alter them by turning them into a romper like this. So I'll cut off the snaps and turn it into a romper. In the first BeBe Babies class, we had some great suggestions on altering onesies and other doll clothing to fit them that would be really simple, using even fabric glue to embellish. So there were some really cute ideas, but most of these preemie clothing is going to fit, and it's really only the onesie or the romper that you have to actually alter, because the socks, just regular newborn socks, fit fine, and so do the hats. I don't have a little hat for this guy. I'm thinking about putting some hair on him, but you'll see this is just a regular newborn doll hat, so it fits. A couple things: you can add freckles using your brown marker that we use to define the nose. So freckles are cute. Hair is adorable. So there's all kinds of places you can get doll wigs, just regular mohair or synthetic wigs that you can sew on. I don't really recommend very many wigs for children's dolls, just because they don't last very long. They get real matted and can rip if they're carried by the hair, but it's a possibility. I also use faux fur a lot, which is probably what I'm going to put on this guy, and it's super cute. And you can get faux fur at pretty much any regular craft store, and it looks really cute. So probably going to put some hair on him because I couldn't find any hats available. And that's it. Your doll is done and he's ready to play with. And you'll notice that every doll comes out looking a little bit different, even though we do pretty much the same process. They all kind of come out with their own personality, which is one of my favorite things about them. So I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial. I hope you enjoy my classes, and there are more to come. Be sure to subscribe to my channel because I always have free videos coming out, typically weekly, if possible. And join the fan club as well and share there because we love to see what you're working on. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. Bye, everyone.